My name is Martin. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Octavia Carbon. And I've been given the interesting task of talking about the state of the carbon markets, which is also interesting because I represent one sort of quite extreme end of that market. But what I will use that opportunity for is to, in a slightly biased way, and I'm happy to admit that being on that extreme end, there is a certain bias, but with data, convince you that durable carbon removal has the biggest tailwinds in climate tech in Africa right now. And if you are a VC, and this is an AfricArena Summit after all, and you're not investing in durable carbon removal, you are missing out on that massive, massive tailwind. So just as a quick note on what do we do as Octavia, that's it. We are building machines that filter CO2 from the atmosphere. We design, we build, we deploy them. We do a few $1 million a year in revenue. We are a team of about 70 people. Everything from the R&D to the manufacturing to the deployment happens here in Kenya. We have gotten the second ever AAA carbon credit rating, which places us in the top 0.1% of ratings ever given out by the leading ratings agency in this space. So let's talk about the VCM. It is a roller coaster. And I think that is sort of very clearly argued by just the fact that the market today is actually smaller than the market was in 2008. And so understandably, lots of investors see the carbon market and panic, right? How are you going to invest in a market that has these extreme swings up and down? Especially like, for example, given in recent years, 2021, 2022, for VC investors, that again might look somewhat familiar, that spike. But the point is that there hasn't really been predictability in this market yet. And signs of strains are showing, especially for the part of that market that is avoidance and reduction credits. So that's things like forest protection, clean energy, clean transport, etc. And that is the bulk of that market. But there is another market that is growing, and that's the one I want to talk about mostly today. And in many ways, it's important to point out one key thing here, which is that the VCM has always been tiny. Again, the most that it got to was something like $2 billion in revenue globally. That's about a sort of mid-cap US company. That's not a big market, but that may well be changing. But you can also ask quickly, sorry, before I go there, like, what actually happened in 2023? You can sort of see 2022 is a pretty big spike, 2023 is quite small. And again, those are the sort of scandals that many folks here might have heard about. Big sort of like questions raised about like the integrity of carbon credits from like forest protection, also about clean cooking, and trust in the market today is still low. But there's another story that we can tell here, which is that the planet needs a ton of durable carbon removal because we keep emitting CO2 into the atmosphere. Oh, sorry, I think that graphic got slightly messed up there. But the point is that like, if the world is going to emit like still some residual emissions by 2050, the IPCC expects something like 5 to 10 billion tons per year, we need to remove an equivalent amount and do so durably, which is no small task. But it also is a massive opportunity. Like if we actually move those 10 billion tons per year by 2050, that is $1 trillion market. And the key thing to realize is that there is a lot of governments, especially in Europe now, who have constitutionally binding targets to actually like hit net zero. This isn't fantasy, this is reality. Like net zero, like the carbon removal part of this equation is legally mandated in a lot of the biggest markets in the world right now. So let's look at this sort of like graph that I showed you earlier another way. What else happened in 2023? Well, what happened is that the carbon removal market specifically took a massive jump from being basically non-existent to being like a sort of like market in the hundreds of millions of dollars. By now, we're sort of like, give or take, a $10 billion market per year, basically. Larger, almost by an order of magnitude, than the voluntary carbon market as it is, the traditional VCM, has ever been. And that's only accelerating. So like, for example, this graph here is from July, and in the 2 months since then, like the actual contracted tons for 2025 have jumped from 16 million tons to 25 million tons. We've already 3x'd the 2024 market, and this is just sort of like the year to date. And so the point here is that like we are now becoming a huge market. And the key thing here is that that can be served from anywhere. Like removing CO2 from the atmosphere in Africa works as well as doing so in Europe. And the key thing is that you have a massive cost advantage doing it right here. And that's especially true for technology like direct air capture. Again, there is challenges in this market, and I do want to talk about that as well. I mean, 80% of all the purchases that you're seeing here is just one buyer, and that's Microsoft. And also, like, while the contracted volumes here are now pretty meaningful, again, we're getting to like the tens of billions of dollars increasingly contracted each year, only 2.4% of those purchases have ever been delivered. And that's also partly why you don't actually see that spike showing up more in the actual like VCM data yet. Because like so little of that is actually recognized revenue, so little of that has actually been delivered. But the point here is that this is a wave that is building. And that wave is building really, really fast. Again, we're talking 3x year-on-year growth. And again, while that's not yet showing in like the revenue data, that revenue is really building. And you can ask, okay, is this a passing fad? Again, like we've had these sort of ups and downs in the VCM a lot of times before. But again, remember what I said earlier, there's constitutionally binding targets for net zero. And that means that, for example, the UK government has recently now said that they will be procuring 5 million tons per year of durable car removal by 2030, 5 years from now. All of the durable car removal ever delivered was less than $1 billion, all put together, basically. That's the kind of growth that we're in for. And it's also true that the UK government is putting in the weight of this sort of contract for difference model behind this as well, that they've also used, for example, to bring offshore wind up to scale in their own market before, basically. So we have all the policy mechanisms, all the weight of those mechanisms that actually brought clean energy to life. That clean energy that we now take for granted, that is barely even an exciting venture opportunity anymore, is now increasingly falling in behind durable carbon removal. We're seeing the same in the EU, and while there's some questions to be settled, which types of credits will be eligible and how, the point is that durable carbon removal and the BECCS and the DECCS, or like bioenergy carbon capture and storage, and direct air capture, carbon capture and storage in particular, are very much sort of favored by those jurisdictions as well. So where does that leave us? What's the outlook for the VCM? Again, I'm happy to wager a few guesses here. So for the traditional VCMs, there's definitely headwinds. There's like the leading sort of corporate net zero standard, the SBTI, has recently like signaled that they will likely not acknowledge traditional carbon credits in the sort of like net zero commitments that corporates make. There's some tailwinds, and I can't touch on them as much right now, like Corsia, the big airline offsetting scheme, is one of them, and there's question marks. But part of the point here is that the traditional VCM will likely continue to be a roller coaster. It's quite hard to say where that goes, but it's important to differentiate that from the durable car removal market that is now increasingly getting to a large scale. So again, like we are seeing 3x year-on-year growth. That's comparable to the early days of the internet. And again, much like, there were definitely people asking early on, is the internet going to be a thing? Is it going to be a market? Again, that seems stupid in retrospect, right? But it's also like fair to say that, well, is net zero going to be a thing is also somewhat of a question that we can ask, well, there's definitely like a lot of momentum behind this. And as long as we believe that climate change is real, a habitable planet needs this to happen at massive scale. And the good thing is that like the world is waking up to that in many ways. Like the fact that we've delayed climate action only increases the market size for carbon removal, because the less we act now, the more we need to act in the form of carbon removal and actually scrub that CO2 from the atmosphere again, which is hard. Within CDR, again, just to like have a tiny sort of like deep dive on this one, biochar today is definitely like the king of deliveries. Like biochar is a way of removing CO2 from the atmosphere durably today. But BECCS and DECCS leads on the contracted volume. So that is like most of the wave that is actually building. Another key insight here is that Kenya is a massive CDR innovation bright spot. So again, if you're VC and you're interested in this, like Kenya has a lot of momentum behind this industry. There's somewhere between 15 and 20 carbon removal companies right now doing everything from Africa's first carbon mineralization, Africa's first concrete storage, Africa's first biochar to concrete storage, Africa's first enhanced shock weathering, and Africa's first direct air capture, which is us. And so that innovation really like is increasingly becoming self-sustaining and catalyzing. And also easy to see why, because we have such a massive edge in serving this global market with the cost structure that we have doing this from Kenya, serving markets in the West and earning dollarized earnings from that as well. And then the final point that I would quickly want to make here, and I think this is really important to understand as a sort of way of characterizing this transition, which is that carbon is no longer easy money. So one thing that I hear quite a lot is that like, well, there's definitely a lot of people that are interested in carbon, especially from the carbon reduction side and so on. And one thing that I hear a lot is like, well, our business kind of works so-so, but with carbon credits, it's great. Like the unit economics are awesome. And the point here is that there is no way of creating venture scale returns with avoidance or reduction credits. Because the point is, if it had happened anyway, you shouldn't be allowed to issue carbon credits from it. That's a principle called additionality that's very key in the carbon markets and very key to understand as you're investing in the sector. So there is never going to be a company with massively outsized profits selling carbon avoidance or carbon removal credits. But we can compete in cost-effectively removing CO2 from the atmosphere, because that is an actual physical service that is rendered. And in that, there is also the potential for outsized and venture-style returns. So that is, of course, something that I also want to wrap with, that I want to leave you with. So that is the really key case here. So like, carbon removal is a wave that is building, and you don't want to miss it. Thank you so much. I think we have some minutes for questions. So I do see that I'm between you and lunch, so I don't know. If there is any questions, of course. That if not, I would say let's go for lunch. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, thank you very much.